Good morning, Year 3. Today we're going to continue writing our newspaper report. We've written most of it and now we're on to the last part. So, you can write the data and learning objective if you'd like to, but I'm going to continue with the rest of it. Today, we're going to write the tail of the newspaper report. We've already written the headline, we've written the lead paragraph, we've written the body paragraph with all the detail, and now we're going to put the tail paragraph in, the last final part. In the tail paragraph, it's a good section to give the reader an opportunity to gain additional information if they are particularly interested in the topic of the news report, to include links to the previous news reports or useful websites, include a final quote from a witness or an expert that helps sum up the story or hint at what might happen next. If we're using quotes from experts, it will make your report more credible and interesting, or it might make it reinforce your point of view, reinforce the things that have happened with an eyewitness report. So we need to use the correct punctuation for quote. In the example, the final paragraph, the final part, is highlighted in red. It says, local resident Goldilocks, 12, Porridge Drive, said, I've used that path hundreds of times and it's always seemed perfectly safe. Mr. Hansel, who runs the village orphanage, commented, of course I warn the children not to approach any gingerbread houses, but avoid the woods entirely? Nonsense. So quotations help us tell us what's been said and who said it. They can help to tell the story by giving the reader opinions of the people involved. Here are 3 examples of what people might say from different newspaper reports or from different stories. Class teacher for year 3 and 4, Mrs. Jones, said, they are a lovely class of children and I really like teaching them. It was the scariest moment of my life, the 28-year-old homeowner told us. They're lucky to be alive, said Sam Fenton, 35, Chief Fire Officer for Greater Manchester Fire Service. In each of these quotes, the part in red is the part that the person says. On each side, there are speech marks at the beginning and at the end. You can also see there's punctuation marks. They've got the exclamation mark, and that goes inside the speech marks. The writing in black tells us who said it, sometimes tells us how old they are, and it also tells us their job or how they're linked to the story. So it says they are 28 years old and they're a homeowner, or Sam Fenton, 35, and he's the Chief Fire Officer for Greater Manchester Fire Service. So we need to include the quote, the speech marks, the person's name, their age if we know it, and their role. They're linked to the story, so that might be their job or how they're linked to the story. We have an eyewitness account taken from last week's history lesson. And this is the account of Mr. Holmes, who's a 21-year-old who was working at the time of the explosion. So he was working in the mine, and this is his opinion, what he remembered from that day. He says, suddenly there was a terrible roar, followed by a gust of wind which blew out every light in the workings. We all commenced to walk forward in the dark, and the first thing I came into contact with was a horse which completely blocked the road. We somehow got as far as the canal tunnel and then found our way blocked. Then we sensed the fire damp. Several of the men started to shout out, but by opening their mouths they swallowed the gas and were soon overcome. Most of us got to the ground, and I remember one man saying, if we have to die, we'll have to die with our hearts up. Hour after hour passed, and in the early morning we heard the sound of picking and the approach of the rescue party. Most of us were in a dazed condition, but the hope of rescue put life into us. Later in the morning, the rescue party cut a hole through the roof, and I helped to lift the men through. I was the last to be got out alive. It's a really dramatic testimony and a really dramatic account. We can't use all of it in our newspaper article. It's far too long. We just need to include a very short section to really emphasise the main points that are in our newspaper report and to make it quite dramatic. I selected a few things that I wanted to put in. I've got his name, which is Mr. Holmes, his occupation, which is a miner, his age, which is 21, and then in red you can see the parts that I've chosen to quote, and they will be written in speech marks. And I'm going to turn that into a sentence, and you're going to turn it into a sentence for your paragraph. Next to it, I've left spaces for another person's name, another person's occupation and an age, and a different quote. last week you pretended to be a miner. So you could imagine that you are giving the newspaper reporter a quote, and you are inventing something that you could say at the time. Or you could imagine that one of the relatives, somebody's family is there, or somebody who heard the explosion from the outside. But you'll need to invent their name, invent their occupation, their age, and then also invent their quote, and use those in sentences at the end of your newspaper reports. So turn your eyewitness account into sentences that will fit at the end of your newspaper article, and that's your task for today. It's only a short paragraph. You've got these two quotes to put into sentences, and include any further detail that you think you might need to if you haven't already. Looking forward to hearing your responses today.